Okay, I'll put a bit of voiceover in this, but I'll be fairly brief. I might do a fast forward a bit later. This is basically installing the servo into the tail. You have to do this first, and it becomes sort of trapped. You have to disassemble the rudder and the elevator off the control surfaces to get back to it. And we are going to glue this in. So, you know, it's sort of almost a sacrificial servo. I have recovered one off an old airframe, but I had to cut the whole piece out to get the servo, but it was, anyway. So, first thing you want to do, I'm using that servo, the 843, the digital and metal gear. You know, it's a pretty high torque servo. There's all the specs if you want to read it. And it's about 5 grams lighter than the other one that I use, which is the 939. I used this before, so this will work, but it weighs about 5 grams or thereabouts more. Yeah, 4 grams more, and everything counts in the tail, so I wanted to get rid of it. This one's actually, I think, a better servo anyway. Costs a little bit more, not a lot more. So first thing to do, is you've got to thread the servo lead through there. You will be putting an extension on this later to get it all the way up the fuselage. I actually personally prefer to cut it and solder it in, but anyway, it's whatever works for you. You can do it with an extension lead, and you can get to it again. It's just, you know, so you can fish it out of the tail because that hole is always open, even though it's got a rudder in the way. But I'd rather not go there. Anyway, I'm just going to solder one in. Now, something you will need is one of these, comes with it, or something similar, and trim it off to make one of those, because you only want that arm coming out the side, and you want it coming out roughly in the middle. I have, see, it's got a screw holder there. I've trimmed the one off the back, and really important, I made this mistake, don't ask me how, first time, I didn't center it, and it became difficult because it becomes trapped. So use the servo controller to center it, so, and center, and make sure the arm is at 90 degrees or fairly close to it. You'll then want to put this screw in, because you don't get a chance to go back to that later without pulling everything apart. The alternative would have been put a door on there. Hey, I chose this way. If you really feel like it, put a door on there, but it does actually add to the integrity of the fin. Probably alright without it. Anyway, that's what I did. So you can feel free to modify. So we need a little screwdriver. It's as close to right angles as you can get. It's fairly tight. Something I like to do now, put a bit of tape on the side. A little bit further forward. The reason to do this is we're going to glue this thing in, so if you ever want to pull it out, you're not putting the glue directly on the servo, you're just putting it on the tape. And the glue won't stick to it, so, well, that's the plan anyway. Worked last time. Now to get it in there, you actually have to do that to get the servo in there. And then we pull it back. doesn't really matter. We know that it's centered when the servo is centered. So now what we will do, something else I'm going to do is drill out the hole to fit the bit of wire that I'm deciding to use. You can get to that later, so it's not, don't have to do it straight away. With this servo, it sits, if it's sitting on the ground, it sits right flush with the bottom of that. So I might put a few more bits of tape under there. But what I'll be doing now is I have a bit of scrap balsa, which is, what is it? How thick is that? About 2.86, so it's 3mm, and it fits down the side there. So I'll just use that as a wedge. If it happens to get stuck, not a problem, just trim it off. But I intend to, well, you can either glue that in. Yeah, actually I probably will glue that in. I didn't last time, but it's not a bad idea. You can use this as a little extra. Make sure it's not bulging on the sides, because it's something you don't want. And I will put a bit of probably Gorilla Glue, just gives it the time to position it before it sets. It's plenty strong enough for this application. If you use CA glue, well, same old thing you probably usually have is it'll set really fast. So if you've got it slightly crooked, it's no good. So what I'll do is I'll smear a bit of Gorilla Glue around the surfaces. I won't put it on the end because it's not actually touching at the end in there. So I'll just put it at the sides and a bit at the bottom. I'll leave that bit of wood there and I'll trim that off later. So just to show that that works, I'll put in a battery back on. And that's our elevator. Recentered, that's a double check, that's great. Yeah, so we just glue it in and then we'll move on to the next stage. That's the glue. That was the Gorilla Super Glue, exactly what I said not to use. That's the glue that you want to use, so I guess learn from my mistakes. Double check that you got the right glue, which I do. The other one would work, but you just have no time. Little postscript. Use one of those clamps, just very lightly, with a piece of flat scrap ply. That'll come off when I'm done, and just keeps it flush with the back of the vertical stabiliser. Okay, that's the rudder. It has a joiner, goes across this, which is part of the spike, and then has the top cap. Put a toothpick in there to line up the two sides, but we're only interested in one thing at this point, and that is putting the control horn in. So I've cleaned it up and I've made sure that a 3mm I think it's 3. Tube goes through there, which goes through there, and I don't want to glue this in, but I want this to fit properly. Make sure it's coming out the correct side, because the control rod comes out the correct side. Right now it doesn't quite fit, so what I have to do is just clean it out a little bit. So I'll do that and I'll come right back. Okay, now that that fits in there, might be slightly tight, but I can get it in every time. What I'm going to do is put a bit of glue in, and then I'm going to pull the carbon fibre rod out, because I need to be able to put it through hinges later, but I want to leave that in place. Okay, also looking at the tailplane. So far I've sanded these back a bit. It's still not enough range for my liking. It's just a dry assembly. So I'm going to pull that apart and just sand these back a little bit more so that I can get a bit more deflection on the elevator. I don't want it to go, if it doesn't have enough deflection and you put the servo through, you can end up probably tearing at the hinges or something like that, because it'll be jammed. Okay, this bit, all we're going to do, these aren't glued in yet by the way, but it doesn't really matter if they were, so the order is a little bit up to you, but all we're going to do is glue these in. But what we have to make sure is we've got the right way up, otherwise it's going to get difficult. So there's all these 3 for the rudder. I didn't integrate them like I did here, purely for the printing convenience. So the best way to do this is to do the dry fit with all of the rudder components, and then put them all in and make sure everything can move, and you can take the rudder out or leave it in place, it doesn't really matter, but it's there just to make sure these hinges are glued in, aligned, and have enough clearance. Anyway, I will do this in fast forward so you don't have to listen to my voice again. Okay, just letting those hinges dry in place. At the moment you can pull the carbon fibre rod out. None of them are glued in place, so we should be able to take that out afterwards. Ultimately you will need to put a little bit of glue in there just to lock these two together, and there's two rods there so that the torque is carried through from the bottom to the top. It's a bit loose at the moment, but they will be glued in a bit later. Got to make sure the clearance is still there for this, and you know that the cap is going to sit just off the top of the vertical stabiliser so that you got clearance, but we'll worry about that later. So the only thing that we've glued here are these hinges, and nothing else should have glue on it, so that we know that this thing can move around enough. We'll fix everything up later, just the hinges at the moment. Okay, going to glue the horizontal stabilisers on. It's not really necessary to glue the carbon fibre rods in. Can if you want. Their purpose is more in flexure. It's never going to want to pull out unless it's really impacting the ground. The front one is really just to stop rotation, and the rear one's where the strength is. It's possibly longer than it needs to be. It's 245 millimeters long, the rear one, 70 mils at the front. So maybe if you really want to save a few grams, you could possibly shorten it. I've left it at the original length. I guess one advantage of the full length is it doesn't push through and become lopsided. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to glue this with CA just because I don't want to have to clamp it, so I'm just going to hold it for a little bit. Yeah, okay. Okay, very quickly, I'm going to do a dry assembly of the tail in the order that I believe it should go together. It's not the only way to do it, but I think it's probably the optimal way. So, as we have things now, they're glued in. So, it's probably easier to put the rudder on first, and for that, you have the short torque transfer, which is 54 millimeters long or thereabouts. So it goes on the hole that's inner. You then got the same spot there. Line it up with the hinges. It could be slightly longer because it'll take slightly longer, but 54 is about right. Okay, now we have the Hinge carbon fibre rod, which is 160 long, so we want to line that up so that it goes through, and this is all just to make sure everything's going to fit. Okay, so it goes all the way down, right down to here. Don't knock the little piece off, but has to go there. And now the top of the rudder, you've got the toothpick sticking through there to help line up the tip. So that's that part. It's got to be free. There's a slight clearance under there. We're not gluing it just yet, but I'm just showing you. So that'll be glued on there. We're going to put some glue on the torque there just to stop things rotating so that the top and the bottom move together. Okay, so now, just put that to one side. We have two halves of the elevator. So we have the centerpiece. This is 115 long, and we want this to go through the rear of that. We're trying to keep the axis on the hinge line, which is through the forward hole here, so that it's just how you do it. Okay, so now that'll go in the rear hole there, and this will go in the rear hole here. Just slide that in. Okay. Now we'll get the tail assembly back again. We're going to line that up with the hinge holes. So okay, we've got to pull that out slightly. And we've got our elevator hinge, which is 355 long, and it will go in from one end through the horn into the other side of the elevator. And you'll have about 4-5 millimeters just sticking out on either end. So we have the tips. You can see there's a little hole there for toothpick and a bigger hole for the carbon fibre. So that's just going to glue on the elevator half. There's one on each side. So that those tips move with that. I think it's called a counterbalance or something. Okay, so once again we're going to have to glue the rods to stop them rotating so that these move together and don't get the opportunity to go separately. And we'll be gluing the tips just on the elevator part. And then finally, what we'll be doing is we'll put the spike on here. This is really just cosmetic, but I think you'd agree it'd look a bit silly without it. And that should, I'll make sure your horn is sufficiently out. And you can see that it will slip over that, plonk, and that'll get glued in there. So we'll make sure we've got the clearances to make that work. So the next part, I will just do this in fast forward, gluing the relevant bits as we go along in pretty well that order. Okay, here we have everything glued in place. So there's really only glue for the tips that holds the hinge rod in. So I guess you can pull them off and slide the rod out if you needed to. There isn't even any glue in the rod in the tip. You could put it there though. The only bit that's glued is the torque rod, the rear one there, and it's glued as well as you can into that slot. And yeah, you get a reasonably stiff torque over the two. The rudder's similar. If you take the cap off the top, you can slide the tube, the hinge line tube, all the way out. So anyway, next step, seeing as all that's together, is we're going to do, well, I've already done it, the control wire. I use about a 1mm diameter wire. For the rudder, you're going to want to go for the outer horn, probably. Hey, maybe you don't. But you have to sort of bend the wire. You get about 8mm or more up, and then you put in another angle like that to get away from the fuselage to go pretty well out to that upper point there. So to get that in, you've got to make sure that wire is long enough for the entire fuselage when it's on there. So it goes up the inside, you can see in there. So this wire is long enough. I can't remember anyway, the actual length. But so this wire, once it's all bent, can only really go in this end. Now that's fine. Okay, so it goes into here, and essentially it just, when you've got it mounted on a servo, it won't be able to rotate so much. It'll just bend up and down. Either way, you just manipulate it a little bit until it goes into the outer hole. And the springiness of the wire should mean that it can't really come out. Not without you doing this. So you could just leave it like that. There's no way that's going to drop down below, but if you make it slightly longer, even less likely to. And you can always do what I do, and that's I haven't printed it yet. It's a little one of those retaining clips that slips over the wire and clamps around the wire there to hold it in place, or you can buy a commercial one. I will show it. I thought I printed those. Oh well. Anyway, yeah, it's not going to come out of there in a hurry, but that's essentially the rudder control. And now I'll do the elevator control. So it's a fairly convoluted bit of bending to get that in. So a Z bend will go in here, and we'll put a pin out or in there with another one of those clips on it. There's a bit of an offset between the two, so I'll show that when it's done. Yeah, so that pin there, by the way, is about 8mm plus long, and the distance back to the bend and there is around about 18mm. You've got to give it enough room so that it can go that far and that far. So you don't want to put that bend in too far up here, it'll just get jammed. So anyway, that gives us about the right. Might need to clear that little notch out to make sure the horn clears it. Anyway, this is all pretty good. So back when I've put in the elevator one. Okay, here's a tip for people like me. Make sure your control horn holes are big enough to take your control wire before you install it. It's much easier to do before you install it. Anyway, this is what I will do. I'll get there in the end. But basically just drilling it out with a bit of wire. You could heat the wire, I guess, but I'll just take my time and do that. I'm getting there, and otherwise you'll never get the Z bend through it. You can use a little drill bit, but it's kind of hard to grip and kind of hard to get in there with a Dremel or anything, and yeah, much easier to do before you install it. Anyway, not a huge problem, just annoyance. And something you can do better, assuming you watch this video to the end. Success! I got the wire through. Wasn't that hard. Got a Z bend in it. Okay, did I make it too long? Maybe. Just slightly too long to make the turn. So I'll just try and trim the end off, otherwise I'll just do another Z bend. You don't want to poke it into the bottom of the tailplane. This is just the first part. All can do with being a little bigger. Okay. Now, what I found is you can't go straight back to it, and I haven't actually fixed that yet, so that really needs to find its final home before I fix it in place. Anyway, it's sort of got to go in at right angles to this rather than off at an angle, if you look at it. So it's sort of got to go down, out, come in square, and then we can put a clip on the end of that. I guess if you have a different system with maybe an adjustable clevis or whatever they call on there, it's up to you how you set this up. This is just how I do it. But okay, so put a few marks on here. But basically it's going to come out to about here. And then it's going to go straight down and straight out to there. That's what the old one did. Alright, so I'm going to bend it about there, straight down. So it's about level with that. And then we can, anyway, I'll show you. I'm going to cut this a bit shorter just to make it easier to work with. Now like that, so it's going to come straight down there. So from that height, let's go So I will need a clip on this to stop it from popping out, because it can pivot that way. At the moment it's slightly long, got a little bit of up elevator in it. I know that's in the neutral, so I could deal with this several ways. I can straighten that a little bit. That's probably the easiest thing I can do until I get that about right. And then I've got to find one of those clips. I know I've got some of them around. I'll show you when I've got them. Oh. And the thing I haven't done is fix that bit. I'll do that after I figure out exactly where I want it, but just a tiny bit of glue will do that. And we need to put the clip on here just to stop that from sliding out, and we'll glue the clip behind it so that it just can't come off. Okay, I've just put a small amount of a thin CA on the rear spar only, and the reason I did that is so that it wouldn't slide side to side, and also so that it just loses a little bit of flexibility and allows the torque to go across the two spans with the horn. I didn't put on the front hinge line because if I ever need to take that out, I don't want it, it's not glued at any point. Maybe, not even at the end. You can pull the tips off the end of the elevator if you really needed to and pull that spar out. I'd glue it if I needed to, but I don't need to. I don't think. You would get marginal improvements in torque across the two sides, so maybe a little bit of glue in there if you feel it's necessary. And the other thing to make sure of is that you've given yourself enough space that you can pop the elevator wire out after you've glued it. So, just to make sure, even though I've glued it, I already checked this, it fits. And the one other thing, you've got to line these up before you glue anything, is that elevator line. The horn doesn't catch on the inside of the spike. Anyway, next step is to glue the spike on the back. Okay, going to glue the spike on the back now. It's cosmetic, I guess a bit of airflow. It's important to make sure that it fits flush against there, so you have to clear these holes out, make sure they're not sitting on any of the rods. It should just go in like that. I made a small error in my assembly in that the upper part of the rudder is just slightly lower than it should be. It should have had a little bit more clearance, which means I'm just getting a small recess that's going to form there, but it'll be easy to fill later. The important thing is that it goes in at right angles and that the rudder can clear it. So I'm going to use medium CA so that I can let it set while I'm holding it. Yeah, otherwise I'll be here forever. The other one would be some of the Gorilla Glue, but anyway, I'm going to go for the medium CA. So I'm just going to put it on that face and shove it on there, trying not to get it on any of the control rods or the hinges. Okay, we'll do this fast forward. That's the clip thing I keep trying to think of the right word. It's in the accessories directory to print. It's a pushrod retainer clip. It's a 1.2mm rod, doesn't really matter. Anyway, it's there to print, or you can go and get a real one. I bought one from a store. Okay, and that is the thing we use on there. So yeah, once I clean it up, clips on there, and I usually put a bit of glue on it because I don't entirely trust that not to fall out. Yeah, anyway, sorry, not on that side, it goes on that side. Yeah, so that'll go in the wire there, and that'll clip up into place. Anyway, I'll show you when I'm ready.